Okay, good evening. Welcome to the second session of Nuts and Bolts of New Ventures. Yesterday I did an introduction to new ventures and tried to put together some things to think about if you are thinking of a venture, or you're thinking about joining a venture, or if you're thinking about investing in a venture. A couple of things were create value, and we talked about that a bit, and then capture value. If you do those two things, you have something. I talked about the three whys. When people look at things, they say, why this? Why is this something important that I ought to spend time or money doing? Why now? Is this the right time? And why this team? And then if you answer those all in a good fashion, the fourth one, which is why won't this work? And then I talked about four cases that I've been involved in where the components that I think make for success are ideas, and we talked a little bit about that, execution, timing, and people. And tonight is sort of the people night in that regard. The first part of tonight, Mindy Graber is going to be leading us through some exercises and discussions around negotiation. You don't negotiate with AI, apparently, these days, but you do negotiate with people, so it's a people issue. And the second part of tonight will be on organizational and people issues about how to build teams, et cetera. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Mindy Graber. And Mindy, why don't you explain a little bit about your background? I think it's better if you do it.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I graduated from MIT, and I have a degree in mechanical engineering. Afterwards, I went to work in the computer industry, and I started a company. I'm a founding employee of a company that does speech recognition. But along the way, I became a mediator. So I'm a mediator in the Boston District Courts, and I'm a non-attorney arbitrator. So I resolve civil disputes in the court system, and I still have my day job as Chief for Quality and Customer Satisfaction, developing speech recognition applications. And I've never met anybody who has, but if anybody's ever called MIT's main number, 253-1000, it's an automated system that's our system that answers the phone. So, okay, so on we go. Most ventures fail because of people issues and are really a failure of the relationships among the team members. So Joe wrote this a while ago. And actually, this is the impetus for this course, is seeing so many companies fail not because of technology, but because the two founders were unable to get along. And so I've seen a lot of IP wasted. So sort of my platform is that if we could get people to figure out how to communicate, have difficult conversations, and learn to negotiate, that these small startups would last a little bit longer and be able to be productive. So I'm going to go through some negotiation skills that you will use for the rest of your careers, to subordinates, to your managers, to your customers, and will really help you have these difficult conversations and help them be productive. Okay. So the other thing I want to say is, the difference between being an engineer and a mediator. As an engineer, my job is like, get all the facts and then come up with the best optimal solution. As a mediator, you're really just trying to help the two parties have a different conversation than they had before. You're trying to help them understand where they each are coming from, and is there something that they can both agree to? So you sort of step back, and your problem is to solve the meta problem. Okay. So our agenda is, I'm going to talk very briefly about negotiation because there's 1.2 million books available. And then the kinds of startup negotiations that you will have. First and foremost, between each other, if you have co-founders. How many of you are planning to start a company? And how many of you have an idea of who you might want to start the company with? And how many of you really are feeling to start a company completely by yourselves? Okay, so a few people. So you don't need this. You can argue with yourselves. Okay, so we're going to go through what co-founders, intra-company, inter-company, and we have a role play that actually happened here at MIT. So before we get started, I need everybody to take a partner because you're going to be partners now. You're going to be co-founders. So please, everybody get to with someone. If you have to have 3 people in a group, that's fine. But 2 people, please find a co-founder. Because otherwise, this is no fun if you're doing it by yourself. Just go to anybody, pick anybody. If you've brought your co-founder with you, that's fine too. So, but if you don't, please, is everybody paired up? Okay. Don't make me sick the TA on you. He's really good. Okay. All right, on we go. So there are many different thoughts about negotiation. And there's basically 2 main ideas. One, that negotiation is competitive. It's like a win-lose. It's more important that I get what I want, and I don't really care too much about our relationship. The other side is interest-based, where we're trying to it's a joint problem that you and I have together, and we're trying to optimize it for both of us. And our relationship is more important than necessarily winning or losing. And so the kind of mediation that I do in court is really facilitative interest-based, which is helping people understand what their interests are and coming up with solutions from their interests. So we're going to talk about that. But I do, at the end, maybe I'll talk about AI, because this question always comes up. But anyway. All right, so interests are, why do you want what you want? You know, people say, well, I want to have this. And it's like, well, why? What are the reasons behind it? And what are your fears or hopes? And what do you need to do? And what are you concerned about? And by understanding what your interests are, those leads to options. Because you can now say, okay, well, I'm afraid of this. And then say, well, what is an option to allay that fear? What is an option that you could do? So the standard picture is you start out with a position. You owe me $500. And the question is, why do you owe me $500? Well, you ran over my fence. But an option could be, so I need the money to fix my fence. But an option could be, well, hey, I can fix the fence, or I have my brother fixes fences, or something like that. So there are many possible solutions. And as an engineer, we are trained, you start with the answer. You start with, this is how we're going to solve the problem. And then when you say, well, why are you coming with that way? Then you can get to other interests. And so I teach this, a little bit of this in a workshop. There's 2009, which is an engineering design workshop. And I want the engineers to have more productive conversations than, we should do it this way, or we should do it that way. You know, because some of the reasonings are, well, I want to write it in Python because it will take me too long to learn any other language. So these are the things that we're trying to get to, are the whys. Okay. So in startup negotiations, the first thing you're going to have is you're going to have to negotiate with your founder, if you have 1 or 2, and you're going to negotiate within your company, and then also outside your organization. Now, your organization is not just, you know, your vendors. It could be your vendors, your people you sell to, your partners. There's a lot of people that are sort of in the out group that you're going to wind up negotiating with. So between the founders, I have it sort of set up as 3 ideas. I call it the first questions. The founders agreement we'll get to briefly, and then the team agreement. So let's quickly do this. So the first questions between founders, like if you are starting a company, is why are you doing this? And what do you hope to get out of it? And what does success look like? But actually the third question is almost the most important, because you really need to understand where the other person is coming from. What are you giving up to do this? I'm giving up grad school, I'm dropping out of school, or I'm giving up this career, or I'm not going to be a professor. So what are you giving up to do this venture? And I think, talking to Joe a lot, this is a big question that people make assumptions about. So what I'd like you to do with your co-founder is take the next few minutes and take turns answering this question to them for whatever it is. Don't give away any proprietary information. but unless it's your actual co-founder. But instead of just saying it to each other, when someone says something to you, we're going to do active listening, and the other person reframes it back. So why are you doing this? I'm building something to help diabetes because my sister is diabetic, and I really want to, I don't want anybody to suffer the way she did. And the other person is just going to reframe it, say it back. So your interest is because you have a personal interest in this and it's a debilitating disease. So confirm that you've heard and understood what the other person said. Okay, you get a few minutes. Talk to your co-founders. All right, thanks. So how many of you have already had this discussion with a potential partner? Okay, so I actually mentor some startups, and I was at a meeting, and there were three of them, three founders, or two founders, and I said, we went through and did this, and I wrote it all down, and I said, okay, did you guys, this is all rehashed, you already knew this? And they kind of looked at me and they said, no. And so what you're really doing here is you're creating what I call the circle of interest, is that this is why each founder wanted to start the company. Now, you have a completely different set of reasons, but showing it this way just gets everybody literally on the same page, why they wanted to do what they wanted to do. So this is what I wrote for them. I took some of the details out, but so you can come up with some idea of understanding where the other person is coming from. All right, is that helpful? Is this resonating with anyone? Okay. Now, this slide I added because everybody comes up to me and they says, what makes a good partner? If I'm looking to have a co-founder, what can I do? And so I call this just honest assessment. And the good news is the panel that's going to come behind me come after me. They're going to really talk about people and people issues. But between the two founders, what it really is what are your skill sets and what are you each good at and want to do? And what I am not saying is, let's just say you're two mechanical engineers and you're building this widget together and you decide, we both have really excellent mechanical engineering skills. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be co-founders. What I'm saying is understand what skills you will need to buy or outsource or have other people do. So when you're looking at a partner, just understanding where you need skills, what you have, which one of you really is very outgoing and loves to talk to venture capitalists, which one would rather make the charts and graphs, just so you think your best friend, but when it comes down to really talking about what are our skills and what do we need, that's another conversation you need to have. Okay. So the founders agreement, again, I'm not going to spend much time on this because, again, there's a lot of books of what you do, and you can go to a venture capitalist or a person or a lawyer. There's lawyers who write these up. But again, it's talking about, who owns what, who did what, who owns the IP, and basically, and the other thing is what happens if one founder leaves. And one thing that people don't know is if you have a founders agreement that you both agree to, you can both agree to change it someday. So people feel, and I've seen it, people feel like that once they've signed away their life or whatever, it's immutable. But if you both agree that you want to change something, then it's changeable. And even when I was talking to the company that I was mentoring, I said, okay, this company is changing so quickly. How often do you want to have this discussion about where we're at and what are people's ideas of why they're doing things? And they said, oh, probably every 6 months. Now, that doesn't mean you write a new agreement every 6 months. But the thing is to just think about things that they don't have to be once you decided something at the very beginning. Everything changes so quickly. If you both agree, you can both agree to changes. So, is that helpful? All right. Now we're talking about the team agreement. The team agreement is not really necessarily a written thing. When you go into any company, anytime there's two or more people working together, there's this hidden team agreement, how your team will work together, what kind of corporate culture are you going to have? What kind of roles are you required for the company? How are you going to make decisions? And also having this kind of agreement says, well, how are we going to discuss things? How are we going to say when things go wrong, can we have a template so that we can just talk about the problems as opposed to, everybody's upset and yelling at each other or whatever. So one of the things about the culture, and again, the company ethics do no evil. Google did have that as its ethics. You can argue whether or not it's still their ethics, but they did think about it before starting the company. And what is the common purpose? And the other thing is how will you interact with each other? And again, it doesn't matter what tools you use. Like one company, they just had a ticketing system. And because they were so busy in different parts of the country, they just assigned each other tickets. And then they would respond to tickets. So it's whatever you agree to and how you're going to communicate. But sort of leaving it nebulous, and everybody starts out with emails. Then as things get more and more complicated, communication gets very difficult. So this is really like, how are we going to communicate? The other thing is like assigning roles. Obviously, if there's two of you, you each, both of you, each of you do half, or you share some things, or you take some things, but who's going to do what? And again, this is going to change so quickly as your needs change. So at the beginning of the company, maybe if you have a developer, they're going to be slammed. And if you have a salesperson, they may not be so busy. And then as time goes on, one person maybe does a little bit less, and one person does a little bit more as things go on. But the next thing is accountability. Typically, there's a board of directors, which everybody's accountable to. But if it's just you and your other partner, it's understanding what you're accountable for and how you're going to manage and document it. And just having these discussions and thinking about these things. The other thing is about decisions. How are you going to make decisions? And what are you going to do if you disagree? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a couple minutes with your co-founder. Come up with ideas on what's going to happen if you disagree on a decision. Okay? So just see how many things you can think of. All right, go. If you disagree with your co-founder, what are you going to do? Well, it could be ask the board. I mean, that could be a solution, but. Okay, so we're going to be, if I can get this out, I'd like to ask you what some of your solutions are when you disagree. Actually, there you go.
We have 4 different ideas, and first of them would be ask third party.
Ask who?
Someone independent.
Independent. Okay, third party.
Yeah, third party.
Okay, good. Someone else?
We've been discussing there is quite a few approaches. One is basically you discuss in the group, but then you take a call who has more expertise. Like we've been hearing yesterday the story. Like in the group of 3, for example, if some of them expert is in engineering and this is engineering question, then you basically leave it to the guy who is expert. But sometimes it's not as a case. For example, you talk about sales and strategy and overall, and then you kind of need to take step back and take both ideas on the table and see how you can merge them together. Probably this is another way.
Any other ideas? Does this, any other, how about over here? Do you have an idea?
Yeah, we're talking about another possibility that when you are in the team, that might not be the only method that you guys are discussing. So if 2 founders are having disagreement on one method, we're talking about one person compromise on this setup, just give the trust to another one, and for another method that co-founder will, support your decision, sort of compromise a little bit.
So it's mutual trust. Any other ideas over here? You want to say something?
There's one down here.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, yeah, you try to reach compromise as much as you can, and you delegate to the experts. But then at the end of the day, and there is still no mutual ground, CEO makes a decision.
Okay, as long as it's discussed, I think that's fine. And the reason why I kind of harp on this is I had a workshop on helping small businesses avoid court. So after I'd been in court and heard all these things, I was like, okay, what are the things? And I went to a lawyer. I'm just going to put this. I went to a lawyer to help me with this with this case, and he said his job had been to litigate between co-founders. So, and he told me horrible stories of co-founders winding up in court, and actually one case, they actually had a fist fight in front of the judge. So I said, well, he basically said, well, never have a company be 50-50, because that's why they all wind up in court. And I laughed at him. I said, 100% of the people I talk to are 50-50. So we better give them tools so they can avoid you, so that they don't, if they have the tools, they don't have to go to court and sue each other. So that's a hard lesson. Okay, so now I'm going to pick some random volunteers. We're going to do the role play. And this really did happen here at MIT when there was a 100K competition. There was an inventor, Sandra, and she invented a very inexpensive way to process crude oil. And there's some students found out about it, and they wanted to enter the 100K competition. So I would like to ask for volunteers to read. There's 3 slides that it's just all words, and I'd like someone else to read them. Anyone want to read in English? Okay, there you go.
Got a volunteer up at the
Okay,
top.
good.
Right down.
Okay, so here.
So just read the whole thing?
I used to hand these out as pages, and it was just so much of a waste of time. Just read this whole thing, please.
Okay. Sandra has a prototype, but it can only process 1 cup of crude at a time. Several undergraduates heard about this invention and were introduced to Sandra. They hit it off and somehow decided to enter the 100K competition and perhaps start a company. The relationship between the inventor and the undergraduates was never documented, but the undergrads began working intensely on writing a business plan. They didn't stop there, though. They made connections with executives at large oil processing companies who, of course, were very interested in the invention. They put in a tremendous amount of time in the venture, sometimes to the detriment of the regular classwork. Just before the competition, however, Sandra's thinking about pulling out, saying her invention isn't ready. This would leave the students disappointed and frustrated that all their work has been for nothing.
Okay, next up there. Thank you, thank you. The next person up there. There's 3 of these slides, so I need one more volunteer after this.
Sandra's invention could only process 1 cup of crude at a time, and she isn't sure how to scale it up or even if the process is scalable. She has no written agreement with the students, and she isn't even sure that students are capable of starting a company. In the end, though, it is her invention, and she feels that she can decide what to do with it.
One more volunteer for the last slide.
Anyone who hasn't spoken?
Thank you, and thank you.
Oh, wow, I got a long one here. They are in awe of Sandra. She has a PhD and invented something that could really be useful and profitable. They're hesitant to bring up uncomfortable subjects like agreements with her, assuming that it'll all work out after they've proven to her how much effort they are willing to put in to make the company a success. They can't understand her reluctance to move forward faster. When they get a company executive interested, she doesn't seem that excited to speak with them. Also, she doesn't seem to really want to show her invention to anyone, even though from the outside, it just looks like a black box and no one would be able to see the inside process.
Okay, so now what you're going to do is you're going to take a few minutes. You and your partner are going to discuss your interests. One of you is going to be Sandra, and one of you is going to be the students. And you're going to talk about what are your interests and what are your concerns, and you're going to reflect back what you heard the other person saying, okay? So I'm going to give you a few minutes to do that. Okay, so again, we have some other comments that we wanted to hear.
We're just going to go to the Zoom quickly. On the Zoom, Sims is pointing out, is saying the onus is on Sandra to reach out to the students and explain her views and her considerations and her concerns. So Sims Online is pointing the onus towards Sandra. Back over to anyone in the class.
Okay, so now,
Back.
yeah, so now what I'd like to talk about is if you were a student, again, you're going to run around. If you were a student, what were some of your interests?
Have some visibility via 100K
Okay, the possibility of winning the 100K,
and visibility to be
the feasibility,
visibility and yeah.
what is it? Oh, the visibility. Okay, so like, hey, if I win the 100K, I'm like a rock star. Okay.
So besides learning from in the classroom, they want to do a real project.
Learn from real projects, get more experience, okay?
Can I?
Joe has one.
Oh, right here.
They want to get in at the ground level and make a lot of money.
Say it again.
They're going to want to get into a company at the ground level and make a lot of money.
They want to make a lot of money. That's a good reason. That's a good interest. What else? Yeah, go ahead.
So they're not business school students, they're undergrad students. And so grades really do matter, right? Like your undergraduate grade matters, and they've given up grades for this.
Okay. All right, one more over there.
Maybe they actually believe in the idea and they also want to become entrepreneurs. So this is the perfect nomination for them.
This is a perfect combination of, okay. So now, if you were Sandra, what are some of your interests?
I think if I understand correctly, the students came to Sandra. And so my main priority is making sure that my innovation is correct and that when I'm ready to roll it out, that it's ready and that it's, correct. Maybe even some might say perfect. I might be in the weeds a little bit. So my main interest is making sure that the technology is correct and right and not necessarily the business side quite yet.
Right. So your reputation is on the line. Okay.
And based on that, I think if I were Sandra, I want to protect my technology until it gets mature. Like, I don't want to have somebody else who, grab my invention and then put it to the market. The other thing is, I am not sure what interest those executives have that in line with my invention. Are they here for the money? Are they here for making the crude oil better? What are their interests?
So you want to know why these people are so interested, and you want to protect you've spent your life working on this, and you want to protect the things that you've done. Are there any other people that came up with things?
It's sort of similar, but like I want to probably be the one calling the shots since it's my idea.
Okay, so you want to be in charge. Okay, so I actually have several pages of interest after discussing it with the people, but here's a few of them. And again, there's no right or wrong answer. These are the things that people have come up with over the years. And so I've just written it down, but some of the ideas that Sandra didn't want to be in the limelight. And one student actually came up with something interesting, is that maybe she was protecting the students. She didn't want them to chance a career change by doing something that she wasn't sure about. So she actually was thinking about, maybe this isn't the best thing for the students. I'm like an adult and I can decide these things, but maybe students don't have enough understanding to know how risky this is for them. So there's a lot of interest there. So what you're going to do now is, with your partner, just pick the interests that you guys came up with and pick a couple of them and come up with an agreement that would work for both of you. So in other words, pick some of the things that we've heard or the things that you have said to each other, and see if you can come up with an agreement just for a couple of the items that would meet both of your interests. Okay? You have like 5 minutes. Okay. Okay, so who came up with an agreement of any kind? Raise your hand if you came up with an agreement. Okay, what, you want to share what your agreement is?
So we decided that what could work if Sandra and student agree to wait for a certain period of time. It shouldn't be forever, like 1 year or 2 years, has to be negotiated until Sandra is ready.
Okay.
And upon this time, students will be involved again, and students cannot do anything before that. They have to wait.
Okay.
And if Sandra decides after that time not to follow up this, she may give students some kind of freedom to pursue it on their own if she wants to abandon it.
Okay, so that's good. So they're going to agree to wait. And if at the end of the year, Sandra doesn't want to do anything with it, she will let the students take it and decide if they want to move forward with it themselves. Okay, that's good. Anyone else?
So all the technology or IP developed at MIT has part of it. So they should have an agreement with the MIT and Sandra that makes sure Sandra and MIT has the ownership of the IP. So they have to make sure that first, and then they have an agreement that those technology will only be used in school projects, not commercialized yet.
So you're saying the technology should only be used in school projects, but not there. She's not, and the students agree. Did you both agree to this?
I'm the students. I agree.
You're the students, so you agreed.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Good. Okay. Anyone else want to share an agreement they came up with? Go ahead.
Yeah, it's look like that Sandra don't want to run business and students wanted to run business. We saw that maybe it's possible to start small company where Sandra would be mostly on the R&D part, and all business communication would be done by students. For example, students would be kind of CEO and Sandra would be, let's say, CTO person. At the same time, she protect her invention by patent, and it would be only on her name, but students would be work together as communicators and basically how to build business around these ideas, which would be ideas of the Sandra, but at the same time, they take time and do it slowly based on the approval from Sarah.
Okay, so basically start the company. She's the chief technologist and the students are the communicators, and they're actually going to get the company started. And she's going to still continue to work on her technology. Are there any other agreements that came out of this that people want to share? Okay, so how did it really end? That was the agreement. So they did not have an agreement, and Sandra pulled out, and they all went their separate ways after the students had put in a lot of work. So at the time, I did tell them, I said, look, let me help you have this difficult discussion. And they're like, no, it'll work out. you know, she's, you know, a really good person and we're working really hard and she'll see how hard we're working. So let me ask you this. Is this is this like is this a random case that happens only once? Okay. So I feel like this was just a really good example, and communication and having things written down and really understanding. I honestly don't think that either side knew what the other side was thinking. You know, the students were like, oh, this is great, this is going to be good. And she's like, anyway, I'm not so sure. But I don't think they really had a real discussion on what would it take to either go forward or go home. So that is negotiating with your co-founder. You think this will be helpful when you go and talk to your co-founders? Okay, let's go on. Okay, so now we're going to do negotiations within a company. Again, there may be power differentials, there may be confidentiality, there may be legal ramifications, but you still want to have, you're still going to have to negotiate. So I took an example of another client, and Judy wanted to apply for promotion to marketing manager. And by the way, I want to tell you this. In my job where I work at Parlance, I do this myself. When I want to negotiate something within my company, I like put my company Parlance, company interests, you know, my interests, what my manager might want. And I actually showed this to my manager. I said, because I'm trying to negotiate something, I said, well, I wouldn't recommend showing this to people, but having thought about it is very important. And I just said, well, I understand, you know, my company, our company wants to do this, and here's how I can position my interests to help the company. So this is what I helped a client write out. I mean, and she thought about all the different parties who would be interested, and she wanted to be the marketing manager. So then on the other side, I sent her a list. I said, okay, well, this is not the exhaustive list, but here's typical things that a marketing manager is oversees. And what she did is she took this list, made an Excel spreadsheet, put together a plan, prioritized them 1, 2, and 3. And when she went into the interview, she said, well, here is my ideas for becoming marketing manager. And she laid it all out that she had already thought of all these things, and she did get the job. So she positioned her interests in the interests of the company. And it made a very powerful statement, because she sort of came in and said, well, I've really thought about all these things, and here's how I might help in the company. And that's actually what I do too, is like I try to think, well, what are my company's interests? I mean, besides generating more revenue. I mean, they obviously want to generate more revenue, but how can I meet my interests by helping my company, you know, generate more revenue? So that's within a company. So now we're going to talk between companies. We're going to get to Big Inc. versus Little Inc. So I was in Little Inc. And okay, so Little Inc. had a contract with Big Inc. And Big Inc., just to let you know, has huge corporate stable full of lawyers. Little Inc. has no lawyers, right? But we got into a contract which was fixed costs, which they paid us in upfront. But there was a sentence in the contract that said we can cancel this at any time, and somehow you will figure out what time and materials have been spent so far. So the moral of this story, I want to ask Joe, you've seen a million contracts. Are most contracts really specific, or are they kind of nebulous, like somehow you'll figure it out? So they call us and they decide that they're going to cancel the contract, not because we were doing substandard work, but because they were having financial issues and they wanted to stop all work. And they said, we're going to need some money back. So I'm representing customer service, and there's a chief financial officer and a salesperson. And we go into a conference room, just the three of us, and we started going around saying, well, I think we should do this. I think we should do that. And I said, hey, why don't we write down all of our interests and see what would meet our interests? So The partners over here, you're going to be, one of you is going to be Little Inc. CFO, and one of you is going to be Big Inc. All right. And over here, one of you is going to be the sales executive, and one of you is going to be the service manager. And just very quickly come up with some interests that you have about having a relationship between Big Inc. and Little Inc., and they want some money back. Okay. So I'll give you 2 minutes. So if you were the CFO, what would your interest be? If you were the salesperson, what would you be concerned about? If you were the support person, what would you be interested in? And what's Big Inc. thinking about? Big Inc. is the one that canceled the contract and wants money back. It was a service. It was a service that they wanted money back. Yeah, it was a soft service, yes. Yeah, they were trying to figure out that the contract said it would change from a fixed contract to time and materials, and figure out how much, and the two parties would figure out what that should be. No, they canceled it, but they realized that we had done some work, and so, right. First of all, if you're the CFO, what is your biggest concern? Who's the CFO that has a concern here?
They're on that side, right?
Is there a CFO who has any concerns about this deal? Go ahead.
I mean, on a personal level, I guess I don't want to get fired.
You don't want to get fired.
From a company perspective, I still need to pay all my employees, to whom probably I have like a personal relationship with. And like towards my shareholders, I need to provide value, economic value,
right?
Which is probably
value to
dependent
shareholders.
On the contract
And
itself.
what about if a company has to give cash back? What happens? What do we worry about? Cash flow, right? Okay, if you're the salesperson, you've sold this, and now what are you really concerned about if they get money back? Commission, right? Okay, so let me just tell you, we went around, I have 3 pages of our interests. So let me just show you some of them. But the big thing is, we wanted to, well, first of all, we did not want our CEO to get involved. That was like number 1. We did not want a lawyer to get involved. We did not want it to escalate. And we wanted to preserve the relationship with the customer, and Big Inc. wanted financial stability. And again, and also our CFO, she didn't want to look like, oh, we're just this little company, you can step all over us, and we're stupid and we don't know anything, right? So she wanted to look like she was a very competent, first of all, she was an extremely competent CFO. But, and we wanted to maintain the relationship at our level. So what happened? Again, this is a very true story. So I called my counterpart the night before, and I said, hey, can you tell me anything? Can you give me any hints? And he said, no, I can't say anything, but please, whatever happens, just listen before you respond. Just listen to everything they have to say. Meanwhile, our CFO had done all these calculations of what could be our solution space. So she had come up with a lot of things that would work for my company. So we get on the phone, and the 3 of us are crowded in this little tiny room, and it's a speakerphone, and you can feel the tension in the air. And we make the pleasantries, and they say, I don't even want to say the number because then you'd have to know how big the big number is. But basically, they threw out a number and they said, we want this much money back. And our CFO looked up and she's like, okay. And everyone went, shh. And that was the end of it. Now, what kind of negotiation class is this if you take the first offer? What are your thoughts? Like, why should we have taken the first offer?
Well, not saying that I would do this, but it's, I guess, goodwill, and it was less than what she thought that they were going to ask. She
Right.
thought it was a good deal. and it shows then goodwill to work with the big company in the future.
And what were our interests? Our interests were not escalating it. We're not having lawyers involved. It was in our solution space. We did kind of feel it was fair. I mean, it wasn't, and we wanted to preserve the relationship. So to let you know what happened is after this, they continued to be customers and they bought more. So we actually succeeded. And we were very, very happy about this. And now I want to tell you the exact opposite story that happened to another colleague of mine who had this exact same situation. And they said they were trying to buy another company, whatever. And they were negotiating for a long time. And at the very end, he decides, well, maybe I should just push a little bit more. And what happened? The entire negotiation broke down, fell apart. The person packed up their stuff, left, and never did business with them again. So you always have to think about what are you weighing your interests. Now, a lot of times in this class, I have people yell at me that say, you didn't do the fiduciary responsibility for your company by getting the best deal. And I would argue that I did do the best thing for my company because we wound up getting more, preserving the relationship, and moving forward. So any other thoughts on this? Okay, so I want to, go ahead.
How much time did this whole deal take? And like, how did that compare to the financial incentive that you just described?
How does it compare to the what?
You were given X amount of money in return for the breakdown in the sale. How did that compare to the amount of time you spent and your team spent on the deal?
So okay, so if you were saying, when you take the fixed contract and you change it to time and materials, did we probably spend all of that money? You know, I don't know that we would have spent, that we had spent it all, but we probably did a lot more. But it was, again, it was just labor. I mean, not that it's just labor, but we were able to make it back. So that we actually, and you know what? That wasn't even one of our interests. We did not even write how much have we already spent on this in time. We didn't even think, it didn't even occur to anybody to even put that down. So you're the first person to mention that. So thank you. That's a great thing. So let me tell you about some other negotiations between IBM and 3M. And they were negotiating a lot in the before times. And one of the things, I have a close colleague who was at the 3M side. And he said to me, well, sometimes your first deal is your first thing that they throw out is always going to be the best one. And so don't be afraid to take the first thing because it could be the best offer you're going to get. But the other thing that they had in their contract, which I find very interesting. So 3M and IBM were big companies, right, at the time. And they wrote up this contract. And at the very end, the lawyer gets up and he says, okay, in 2 years from now, what's going to happen when something bad happens that we haven't thought of right now? And so the other lawyers look at them and they're like, huh, what are we going to do? So they wrote in their contract that if IBM and 3M ever disagree on something, but in this contract, the two CEOs will get together and have a meeting. So that's, again, whatever both sides agreed to and the contract held, and I don't think the CEOs ever had to meet, but they did have that in the contract, that the CEOs would get together and discuss it. So you can think about people being, creative and coming up with these kinds of solutions. So, all right. Okay, so summary here is, make sure you understand what in a startup, what are the interests of everybody involved, and review the agreements. You can change them if things change, and startups, they really change. And you think you're starting out going here, and then you get a customer with some money, and you're like, oh, well, maybe we should be over here. So when you think about that, things change, and you can change things along with it. And for negotiations, really prepare. Think about your solution space, what might be the parties interested in, and really listen to interests. I'll tell you one more story of another client. She was big ink trying to buy Little Ink, but everybody was trying to buy Little Ink. And so the owner was like really sick of people approaching him. And so she said it took her 6 months to get a meeting with this guy. And I said, okay, so you take your team and you just think of, like do the little circle. You just think of every possible thing that he might want, that you might want, that you could say, that whatever, just write it all down and come up with a list of everybody's interests. So they get to the meeting and they walk in the door and he literally looks at them and goes, what do you want? Because he'd heard it all before. And she started out, said, oh, well, we thought you might be interested. And she started listing the things that she thought he'd be interested in. And she calls me the next day. She says, and we got some of the interests wrong. I said, you did? She said, yeah, but he corrected us. So when they started out with, well, we think you might be interested in having your technology have a wider span than you could do it on your own. And then if they got it wrong, he would say, well, no, I'm more interested in this. And they had a very productive conversation, built a relationship. And again, she also got a promotion out of it. So think about presenting things in terms of interests. And I think you'll do a lot better and when you think about things. So are there any feedback? I'd like any comments here. We have a few minutes for takeaways. Was this a helpful workshop? Did it get you to think about things in a different way? And then are any of you experiencing conflicts in your startups? Oh.
And thank you so much for this workshop. But from the slide point of view, it looks like easy going from the position to the interest. But for my personal experience, when I started to ask questions, why, ask about interest, sometimes people, I don't know, don't trust me. So what's the process of earning trust and jump from the position to the interest?
So sometimes it helps to share your interests. And if people don't share your interests, if people don't share their interests, then you can't really come to options. So sometimes in negotiation, you just start throwing options on the table. And then if they don't respond, you say, well, we'll take that option off. And then they'll say, oh, I didn't say that, right? So I think sharing your interests, and actually, certainly sometimes I'll just ask, like, what are your interests? Like how can we work on this together and solve this? We both, and I might even say, like, we both want this deal to work, or we both want X. Even when I'm mediating, what I try to do is the two parties could be really far apart. But what I'll say to them is, what you both have in common is you want to get out of here. And you both don't want to go in front of the judge, and you'd rather work something out so that you can both walk out knowing what the answer is going to be. And so that actually changes their point of view, that yes, they are mortal enemies and they have disagreements, but they both want to get out of here, and it changes how they view things. So I try to find things that they both agree on. Okay, go ahead.
So some of us here are from Sloan, and we've had econ for managers, and they talk about the thinking of others, and then the game theory, right? So if you're negotiating like an equilibrium, like what's good for me and what's good for you, but then if I want to better my position, I kind of have to understand what would better your position and kind of structure the negotiation around getting you to see where it'd be better for you, but it's also really better for me. And it's really what I learned from that class is really thinking about the thinking of others when you're approaching all of this. And really the first question, I guess, is, yeah, what do I want or what do we need? But I really want to understand what you need and what that organization needs so that I can kind of come up with a good equilibrium and hopefully a better than equilibrium.
I like that. That sounds great. So does that help you answer too? Any other feedback? Any other comments? Nothing?
And
Nothing on the Zoom.
All right, well, I hope this was helpful. Thank you for coming, and if you have any feedback you want to send me, I'm on the site mgarber@alum.mit.edu, and I'm happy to hear from you and give advice or hear your stories, and we all can learn from everybody. We all have different experiences, so I really appreciate you coming and taking time and sharing with me.
you.